Hello and welcome to the Hobby Hour. My name is Chase Untermeyer. I'm a professor of practice here at the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. And today we are most honored and excited to have as our guest Paul Bettencourt, who since 2014 has been a Republican member of the Texas Senate from a district in northern Harris County. And before that was the tax assessor collector of Harris County. So, Senator Bettencourt, welcome to the Hobby Hour.
Thanks for having us on.
Well, let's do as we always like to do to get a sense of you and your pathway from wherever you were born to where you're sitting now in the Texas Senate.
Well, do I address you as a professor or ambassador, Chase?
Neither is required. Chase is fine.
That's right. Well,
but I definitely will call you Senator. That is your first name.
No. Well, before I was senator, I was Paul, and born here in Houston. I'm a quote shell brat by family. My father was a longtime 40-year employee of Shell Chemical, and his final job was complex manager at Deer Park. Went to school here at Memorial High School. Went to college at Texas A&M, and my first job was actually in robotics and process control. Did that for a long time and had a successful career. But as Chase, you had, when we got to know each other, had already became a party officer in the Harris County Republican Party, and one thing led to another. And when the tax assessor who had been in office for 51 years and not another month, his name was Carl Smith, died, the Republican Party nominated me to run for that in 1998. And I did that for 10 years, opened my own business after that. And then when Dan Patrick ran for lieutenant governor, I ran for the Senate District 7. And as an incoming senator, as you said, back in 2014. So that's a thumbnail sketch of Paul Bettencourt.
At what point did the political bug bite? Did that get you as early as high school or some point thereafter?
Well, actually, I think it bit as early as junior high. A mutual friend of ours, Steve Munisteri, was in my junior high, and we actually got to start talking politics that far back. And I was more of the science math guy back then. So I'll still use terms like what gets measured gets fixed in government, because I think that's an important concept. And Steve, of course, went on to be probably certainly the most well-known Republican Party chair in this it's actually in this portion of the century, and we've been fast friends since high school. So we both got bit with that bug, but fortunately, I actually had some real job skills and could make a living first.
Were you a campus politician, either in high school or college?
Yes, the nickname Uncle Paul comes from Texas A&M, where I picked up that nickname in student government. And I think my jobs at that point in time were first political job was student senator, vice president, president of the Off-Campus Aggie Association, judicial board chairman, AKA Uncle Paul.
And would you say that campus political experience helped propel you into real politics, if anything can be more real than A&M campus politics?
Well, at the time, A&M, this was 1980, voted in the Republican actually in the general election, voted 77% for Ronald Reagan, 12% for Jimmy Carter, and 11% for the third party candidate. So it certainly prepared me for Republican politics, and because I actually, do view myself as a Reagan Republican, and part of what I've always wanted to try to accomplish is effectively governmental efficiency, governmental budget, lower taxation, voter roll integrity. And I got a chance to do that when running for tax assessor collector on the ticket with then Robert Eccles. We had a great period of about 10 years when I considered county government to be Camelot, headed by a fantastic county judge, Robert Eccles.
Well, it might seem counterintuitive that an ambitious political person would want to be a tax assessor collector, and yet you not only did it, if I recall, you embraced it fully. You called yourself the tax man, and it didn't seem to hurt you a bit in getting elected to higher office. So talk about that, if you will, about whether being a tax assessor collector was a plus in politics.
Well, it was because I was a tax assessor collector for a tax cut, which was a very novel thing and hadn't occurred in Texas that we were aware of at the time. But I felt like that the tax office was a great laboratory of how to run government with a customer service focus, but also run it cheaper, better, quicker, faster. And we ended up in 10 years basically taking on about 70% more work with on the same amount of money by automating it. When I got to the tax office, there were no 1998. There were no job instructions, work manuals, work instructions, training documents, etc. In fact, we only had 5 PCs that were even in the office, and the version of COBOL we were running for the programmers out there was Sanskrit. That's a joke, but it was basically 18th century, not even dual credit accounting system. And so it was a great laboratory to take all my technology background and systems background and automate what was voter registration, vehicle registration with TxDOT at the time, and of course property taxes. We were the first major county in the state, in fact, to put the property tax roll online, take property tax payments. And my motto back then was get online instead of inline, because the waits for the tax office were up to 45 minutes to an hour just to get to the window to do a transaction. And had a lot of help from some good people. Some are now actually here at my private business, and some that have retired from the county now. But it was I think, an enjoyable period, because you talk about reforming government. Well, you got 2 choices. You can actually do it, or you can talk about it. And we did it, and we had the best customer service operation really in any department in the state. And as a voter registrar, I was especially proud that we would take chase at the time in the presidential elections when George Bush was running, and his years, 50,000 phone calls from voters live, answering them within 4 seconds to tell people where to their voter registration took them to what poll, because at that point we didn't have countywide voting, we had precinct voting. So it was I felt like a very good place to start a career from somebody who had been in business and industry, and especially in automation, because it was in desperate need of catching up to the 20th century before it closed into the 21st century.
Well, I think you've given a very full answer to my question, and that is that an adept political person can take a job that's considered a loser and make it a winner in terms of politics. And of course, nobody illustrated that better than your predecessor, Carl Smith, who was there for half a century. In fact, he converted that office into Carl Smith's office. If you wanted to find the tax assessor collector, as I remember, you couldn't. You had to know who the man was. And any event, he has left us, but you fortunately are still around. So,
well, I was the first Republican elected in that job since Reconstruction. So at times like we go back and we might have been pioneers in fields, depending on what political party we're in. But it's an example of what you can do with government if you've got a good crew that's ready to make changes for the public. And I always said, if I can't save you money, I can save you time. And just putting the voter roll online, putting the tax roll online, being the first county to actually take vehicle registrations online. We actually had to make TxDOT rewrite their software because the alpha site failed, and we were helped them get the beta site to work. So I look back on that period fondly, and it's been really a help in talking to multiple state agencies in finance committee meetings, because Senator Whitmire and I, who come from both political parties, we don't suffer bureaucratic foolishness too well. But it helps actually having a period of time when you actually had to do the work, and at times explain people how to do the work now based upon your experience.
Well, I hope to come back to the subject of local government a little bit later, but let's transport you from the Harris County Courthouse to the state capitol. And this is a fairly sophisticated group of folks on the call or on this program. But for the benefit of those folks who might not know, could you give us a basic primer on the Texas Legislature, House, Senate, how it's structured, and what's happening right now and getting organized?
Well, the Texas legislature is one of only 4 legislatures in the country that meet on a biannual basis. So we'll put together a biennium budget that's used to be $250 million, but it's probably going to approach, not $250 million, $250 trillion, dollars. It probably approach, more like $300 billion in this current biennium. We only have 31 senators in the state of Texas. That's less than the number of congressional members in our state. At this point in time, roughly each senator is now representing about 1 million people, because we've already had over 500,000 people show up in Texas since 2001. The state house has 150 members. I think what the Senate does is unique, because our presiding officer, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, is elected statewide. So he has a statewide constituency, and the Senate has been the source of a lot of good legislation since about 2015. And I think it's a good model of how democracy still works, because in the Texas Senate, both political parties still talk to each other and eat in the same lunchroom. But Chase, that doesn't happen up in Washington anymore, because they literally have separate lunchrooms. And I think part of the what I like about the Texas legislature is that you can be a citizen legislator, but we also still can get together and work through bipartisan bills, which are really the vast majority of the bills that we pass, with the exception of voter integrity, for example. And more importantly, there's still a good line of communication, which is going to be important, especially in a year when we have a record budget surplus.
And we'll talk about that in a moment. But you mentioned the fact that the Texas legislature, in great contrast to the U.S. Congress, does operate in a bipartisan fashion. We've just seen only a few state representatives challenge the practice of having Democratic members as committee chairs on the House. What is it like in the Senate? Does the Lieutenant Governor have some Democratic committee chairs there?
Well, he certainly had, Dean Whitmire has been a chair for a long period of time. And importantly, the local government committee that I chair or have chaired in the past, because that's those announcements have yet to be made for 2023. We look at things from effectively from what gets measured gets fixed mode, because while there are going to be partisan issues that come through, like public lobbying, annexation, et cetera. But a lot of that is trying to sort out what's really best for Texans, and specifically, what can we do to improve Texans' lives? Or I would say, as a conservative solutions to Texas challenges. For example, yesterday we had to every 10 years, obviously there's redistricting, we get new Senate lines. So half of us have to draw for 2-year terms, and the other have to draw for 4-year terms. And when I drew a 2-year term, my quip was, well, at least my political consultants are going to be happy, and that's the type of congenial humor that you can still hear on the Texas Senate, even though we can have all night debates about voter integrity bills or whatever else we have to have. But fortunately, that little spark of humorous humanity still exists in the Texas Senate. Not sure it exists in the federal Congress at this point.
It doesn't. Before we get into some of the practical matters, I'm going to spring a Texas legislative trivia question on an unsuspecting Senator Bettencourt. And we know that there are 31 senators and 150 representatives in Texas. Why did they pick those numbers?
Chase, I'll let you answer that one, because even Uncle Paul doesn't know that. I just know that it's been that way a very long time. Okay. So
you could say it goes back to biblical times, because the folks who wrote the Texas Constitution knew their Bible. And in the Old Testament, there are 150 Psalms and 31 Proverbs.
I never even knew that. Because I have always wondered why we've been fixed on those numbers, because quite frankly, when you look at the ratio of senators to representatives, covering an area with 1 million people, and in some cases, some of my colleagues out in West Texas, like Senator Perry and Senator Sparks, they've got about 50 counties to go. I mean, it's quite a circuit to ride. But now I know it's been enshrined in the Constitution, because it certainly puts the senators on the road a lot.
And maybe there was a biblical reason, but it also kind of makes sense to have about 5 times more representatives per senator. I guess the number could be different, but as you know, the Texas Senate is one of the smallest legislative bodies in the whole country. And
that I could have answered the trivia question on, because it is. And so for example, in the interim, Chase, I was on 10 standing committees and committees authorized by the legislature. So we're on substantially 3 times as many committees as our House counterparts are. So the Senate has a very broad, generalist view of everything in state government, because simply you have to.
Okay, well, let's now head into the session which you've already headed into. And the state controller, Glenn Hager, who was the previous guest on this program, I might add, gave the legislature the news that of the so-called revenue estimate for the biennium that starts on the 1st of September. And the big number was $32.7 billion in additional potential spending. So what do you think about that number, and what is going to happen to those $32.7 billion?
Well, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. Okay. All right. And part of it is because of our constitutional spending cap, since you've already, led into that, Chase. We have a limit of 12.33%, and that counts tax relief underneath that. So we just voted on a couple propositions that were my bills in May, which were to lower over 65 and disabled taxes this year and every year as tax rates are compressed in the future, but also give out an extra homestead exemption at the suggestion of the Lieutenant Governor. I expect to see there'll be lots of those bills passed, because then it's up to the public to vote on items above the of the spending cap, but we'll have probably 15 billion of that simply can't be spent, which is good from a conservative perspective, because what happens in government is that generally those type of giant waterfalls, like all the COVID money that came from Washington to the school districts and the cities and the counties and the state, doesn't necessarily get spent with great efficiency. So the Senate gets to write that budget this year. So that would be Chairman Huffman, and we're expecting the first part of those budgets to come out in 2 weeks. But too much of a good thing actually, is not necessarily a good thing, and actually can complicate things. I quipped that we probably have $1 trillion of requests for those 33 billion right now.
And of the money that you cannot spend because of the limit on new spending, what happens to it? Does it go into a bank somewhere?
Well, effectively it's stranded, but you've got, two forms of this, which is excess general revenue, and also, I'll use the layman's term, the rainy day fund. And those are really from inflows of sales taxes and severance taxes primarily, that, are at peak levels. So there are going to be a lot of common sense things done. It's a good time to buy down debts, good time to continue, tax relief, good time for, one-time infrastructure, projects. There's, as usual with any budget, there's going to be a mixture of everything.
Well, property taxation, you mentioned, is your personal specialty. What possible additional property tax relief might we expect during this session?
Well, the good news is, Chase, that Houston Chronicle just documented this week that the previous efforts that go all the way back to, really when I entered along with Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and produced some results where we passed 2 landmark pieces of legislation in 2019 that limited how fast the growth of major cities and counties could take away from citizens on their property tax levy. It's basically the levy that is laid out on taxpayers. And at the same time, we limited schools to even a lower number, and the state made up the difference. And we also started paying for property tax rate compression. That, coupled with the votes I mentioned earlier from the public, led for a really great result, which is that the average homestead property tax bill actually went down in Houston, went down in San Antonio, went down in Austin. And we were working with data from Dallas, except they got hacked and they are just barely getting their systems back up. But they also had about 15 penny reduction in the property tax rate. And the theory has been, and really it's been the theory since I've been in the tax offices, as values go up, you need to get tax rates to come down to offset those bills. And that worked. And it took a lot of different bills to do it. And that was with a lot less resources than we have now. So I was really proud of that result because it was unexpected. And that story is like the Chronicle's #1 story that's been running in the last month.
Well, given the state's funding formula for the public schools, one thing that the legislature could do is to increase the amount of state support for the public schools under the formula, which would then mean less burden would have to be carried by the independent school districts, who are the principal taxers of property. So is that a solution that we might see this session?
Well, that's the good news, is that's the solution that's already in place. The 2 bills that were passed, the first one was SB 2 in 2019 that limited taxation increases for cities and counties and reduced what was called the rollback rate for the first time in 38 years. That set that how much more you could take on the prior year levy. And we also use the same technique in House Bill 3 that basically put in $5 million of property tax relief, but at the same time increased funding for schools by $6 billion. And we're the only state in the union that we could find since World War II that did both property tax reform and relief and school reform, funding finance reform in the same session. Now, it took a couple years to get that all deployed because we ran into COVID, which triggered a lot of disaster exemptions that were written into the bills as really physical damage disasters like hurricanes and other forms. And then there was Winter Storm Uri that came along that next year. So we actually had to pass legislation to clean all that up. And we got all these bills deployed just in time for what were record property tax appraisals across the board. And we've seen those tax rates come down to the point where homestead tax bills actually been reduced in 3 of the major urban areas. So that was a success in the nick of time.
Any back of the envelope estimate as to how much property tax relief Texans might expect after the current session?
Well, sure, because they probably have received, let's see, from the Texas Taxpayer Research Association, they probably got this year about $5 to $6 billion, and that's on top of what's occurred. So it's maybe 20 to this point. And the key thing is this, Jason, to try to explain this to everyone. What the state is doing is we're buying down the maintenance and operations rate of the school tax bill. School tax bill has M&O, maintenance and operation, and interest and sinking. They combine to a total tax rate, and we're reducing the maintenance and operations rate that the public pays. And so the end result is that tax rate gets compressed every year. So, for example, what's going to happen with over 65 disabled homeowners, for the first time, their taxes aren't going to be frozen. They're actually going to be unfrozen and reduced by that compression rate each year starting in the future. So I think we've got, on average, our M&O floor is now down about 80 cents on M&O in a school district. The good news is, it's way down from when it used to be above $1. And, every year that's going to be bought down by, nickel or whatever pennies. And that keeps reducing tax rates. And especially when values jump through the roof, it's a welcome relief. And it was really nice getting stopped by people that said, hey, I didn't believe you, but I opened my tax bill. And sure enough, I'm paying $200 less this year, or even $50 less, whatever. But that's when all the hard work and fixing all the complicated taxation issues is important, because we don't have a state property tax. We just can't snap our fingers and say, here's what we're going to do. We've got 4,000 plus taxing units in the state. So we have to look at a whole series of top-down guidelines and changes in appraisal methodology and restrictions on taxing unit levy increases, how much money they can take from the public. And the key thing is get the growth of government down. Same thing I preached when I was a tax assessor. Regardless of what income stream you got, whether it's, sales, consumption tax, income tax, property tax, whatever, if you let government grow at over 10% a year, it doubles in 7 years. So you have to slow the growth of government down and make government set priorities with your money, because otherwise it will simply eat out of your business and your home.
Well, you mentioned all the many additional taxing authorities than school districts, and among them, especially in major urban centers in Texas, are hospital districts.
Sure.
And it has been said that another way that property tax relief could be given to Texans would be to expand Medicaid, taking advantage of the federal dollars that are available and we have never taken. And then that amount could be reduced on homeowners' tax bills. Could you discuss that? Why is it that Texas doesn't expand Medicaid using those federal dollars?
Well, historically, it's because of the long-running debate about what people know is, effectively Obamacare will get take all the federal titles out of it because nobody remembers them anymore. And at the time, we did some analysis that basically showed that because the state has to come up with a much higher level of commitment to access those dollars, that was going to cost the state budget at the time more than it could afford. Now, like all things, everything gets reviewed, especially after every major Supreme Court ruling is finalized. So there'll be a debate on that this year, but the hospital districts are actually exempted from the lower rollback rate that the cities and the counties pay because they're considered that to be a higher priority. But at the same time, the money saved there on the switch is not necessarily covered by the long-term state commitments. But that's like everything, Chase, is up for debate.
So you think there's a possibility that Medicaid could be expanded in this session?
Well, I think we've traditionally used waivers from the federal government that continue to be granted for that as a substitute. And I don't want to get ahead of my budget chairman because she's got a budget to release next week. So I don't want to give a preview out. Sorry, I can't give you breaking news.
All right. Well, there's plenty more to talk about, but at least I see a crack in the open door there. But clearly your interest has always been in taxation, property taxation, but you must have some other issues you're working on this session. What are some of the other ones you're concentrating on? Well,
I mean, there's two big areas. One is voter integrity. That's something I started with as a tax assessor. I was in charge of the registration roll back then, and we cleaned up the voter roll from what were 50,000 deceased and felon registrations that shouldn't have been on the roll back in 1998, some of whom had voted in the previous 3 election cycles, even though we had gotten letters from family members that people died in the 1960s, but yet miraculously they voted in 3 elections in the 1990s. When I took that information to legendary District Attorney Johnny Holmes, because we had people from Huntsville that were incarcerated that were voting in Texas elections, he assured me at the time that that person was not voting in person in Houston. And it turned out he was right, because we had at that time about 500 people that were voting clearly fraudulently. We managed to clean that roll up. Got a conviction on voter fraud, on voter registration fraud as a tax assessor. But that's kept me very interested in 2 things. One, voter roll transparency and integrity, because we don't need people, for example, registered in private PO boxes because they don't live there. You've always been slender of build compared to your senator, tax assessor, collector. But even you, Chase, can't fit into a 2x3-inch PO box. Okay, that's not where you live. So we actually passed a bill that said you can't register a private PO box. You get your mail there, can't register there, and that took 2 years to get through the courts, but the courts agreed. So we're going to clean up the voter rolls from that at this point. And then also I did a bill that said if the voter registrar or the election administrator won't do it, that Secretary of State can defund them because they get Chapter 19 money from the state to do voter roll cleanup. What I'm really disappointed about in the election this last time is when government puts on an election and they don't have enough ballot paper at the polls, that's preposterously bad public policy. And so we're having now to write common sense bills on making sure that election administrators in Harris County, who seem to come and go rapidly based on poor performance, can't get millions of sheets of ballot paper out of the warehouse to the polls, with presiding judges of both parties yelling their heads off that they're going to run out ballot paper by 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and they don't even try to resupply people until 3 o'clock.
Do you think that episode in Harris County was the result of incompetence or politics, manipulation?
Well, I mean, I would say incompetence or malevolence. Now, the problem is incompetence can't be tolerated in the nation's third largest county because it's not good for any type of public belief in the system. See, you've got Republicans saying that, that's tantamount to voter suppression, because what is voter suppression? Somebody turned away from the polls. Well, the fact that you've got government not giving ballots there, people were turned away, thousands of them. Now, there's a record number of election challenges filed in Harris County, and we're going to find out what actually happened. But the Republican Party's suit was based on the fact that out of the first 26 that they got testimony on, 22 of them were either in or directly associated inside of Precinct 3, which is the redistricted, stuffed Republican district that is what's left of Harris County Republican government. That's one commissioner, Tom Ramsey, 66% Republican district. So it's not good optics. It's not good operations. It brings up a lot of questions. And it was really bad seeing, as an old voter registrar election official, if Beverly Kaufman was running out back in her day of punch cards, they would have been sent to the precincts instantly. But yet, this new guy, waited until 3 o'clock before he actually asked for help to get more ballots to the polls. And a lot of people that tried, volunteers from the county, started at 3 and finished at 9, but the polls were closed before they got through their 4 precincts to deliver extra paper. It was so bad that precinct judges were borrowing ballots, taking ballots from other polls around them. So we lost complete control of any chain of custody on ballots. And it's a real low point in election operations. And whether or not it's voter suppression is going to be up to the courts to decide. But I'm writing legislation now to make sure it can't happen again.
Now, when you were a tax assessor, again, going back through history, the reason tax assessors were the voter registrars is because Texas used to have a poll tax back before that was declared unconstitutional. And yet it stayed with the tax assessor for many years. Do you think there's an advantage to having an elected official in charge of voter registration versus a professional such as was hired here in Harris County?
Well, if we had hired a professional, it might have been debatable, but we haven't, because their operational performance is disastrous. So I believe that the elected officials should have it. If you go look at my social media, Team Bettencourt on Twitter, you'll see me commenting that we should have that we've only had an election administrator for about 2 years. We've already lost one because of bad incompetence and precinct chairs of both parties going down to commissioner's court complaining about how bad the primary elections were, and the fact that she also went into court and testified that she found all the ballots and swore that she did, and then 2 days later dumped out a bad press release at 10:30 at night on a Saturday night saying that she found 10,000 votes of both parties, and she was gone by the next Tuesday, and she should have been. And when you look at this, Chase, it's just very important that people maintain election operation excellence. I'm using the term excellence because when the public walks in, the last thing they want to hear is there's not enough paper for them to vote on. And so I'm actually in writing saying we should turn it back over to the Democrat officials, the Democrat tax assessor and Democrat county clerk, because it worked before the change. And I think it would work better if you had people that were publicly accountable. And I think part of why was I a success at answering 50,000 live phone calls is because we cross-trained everybody from the taxes, from vehicle registration, on how to answer questions on voters. So if you could get your voter registrar on the phone, you knew where to vote. So you weren't, there was no voter suppression. But when you have an election where you can't get ballots into the field, or you won't get ballots into the field, that's actually a violation of Class C misdemeanor, and you shouldn't be doing the job. But but we're going to have to write more legislation as a result. I do want to also talk about a grid bill, because I think it's very important before we get away here. My second biggest priority besides property taxes was we've got a bill coming out that will incentivize more dispatchable, probably gas generation plants, because we need more base thermal load generation. We need more base load that can run independent of whether the sun's up or the wind blows. Okay. And part of the problem is the subsidies from the federal government on wind and solar are so strong that they can basically sell power at a negative number and still make money. But what that done is dried up financing for gas plants, which by any measurement are clean, producing, electric generators. And so we need about 5,000 more megawatts of base load at a minimum. So I'm going to have that bill come out that will step in, because Wall Street won't anymore, and incentivize gas plant generation. When you strip all the everything down, you look at what happened in Winter Storm Uri. You lost wind generation because the turbines froze in the first storm. There were actually 3 storms in a row. Uri was storm 2. And if you've got cloud cover, you're not, and no sun at night, you've got trouble with solar. And if your turbines freeze up, you got trouble with wind. And then there was a series of catastrophic 6 major generation plants that failed, including the 2 nuclear plants, at least 1 unit each in North and South Texas, because we were very close to what would be considered electrical engineering hell, because our frequency in the whole system had dropped below 60 mega, or I think we were down to like 59. And we were about ready to have a reversal where instead of the electrons moving from the generation to the consumer, it was about ready to start going backwards the other way. And that would have been a catastrophe. So we made a lot of changes. We've reinforced the grid by looking at gas plant lift stations. So the pipelines were running. As it turned out, many of them had turned in a 5-minute form to make them a critical infrastructure. So if power went out, they didn't lose power. So we lost a lot of gas transmission in the middle of it because we didn't have basic blocking and tackling done. And one pet peeve that I just couldn't believe, Chase, was as a plant operations person, because between robotics and industrial plants and process control, chem plants and other things that I did, I was astonished to find out they had never run a simulation in the state of Texas on a heat-driven event in the summer where you had brownouts because of temperature, or a shutdown, problem caused by a winter storm. They hadn't run either scenario. Never done a study, never done a test, never run a simulation. So that got put into the bill, along with changing all the PUC management and how we report up, and now the public gets notices and lots of positive improvements, but we still need more base load energy.
I have to ask, of a classic Reagan conservative Republican, did I hear you just say that the solution is government rather than the free market?
Well, the problem right now is the free market isn't free, okay? The subsidies from federal level are so one-sided to renewables. And look, we've got the biggest wind generation in the country. It's a great thing, okay? We've got, solar power. It's a great thing. It just doesn't work if it's dark, okay? And the wind doesn't blow. And we've seen stuff in the, when the wind pattern shifts around May, we've had some times where we get little, we've got issues with the grid. So we got to level the playing field. I can't get the feds to change their subsidy, but we've got to get more base load energy. Now, there's other plans that are far more, government intervention, like we should buy a capacity market and put that in there. I just want to get the folks that want to build gas thermals enough of a less of a disadvantage, so they actually can do it. Because right now, all our new construction is solar or wind, effectively.
In the minutes we have left, I want to give you a chance to mention anything else you've got on your personal agenda before we talk about a few other topics.
Well, as the local government committee chair, if Lieutenant Governor Patrick chooses me to do that again, we actually passed the most number of bills from, everything from every regulation you can imagine. Okay. And we have a ton of ideas and, that come through that committee. I enjoy that because as somebody used to be in local government, I do understand the interplay between the tax office and the county government and, the city and, the 4,000 taxing jurisdictions that can levy the ad valorem tax in this, in the state. So I get to do that. What's an enjoyable job. And also too, in criminal justice, I had a bill that kind of paved the way, and one of the first bills filed before Senator Huffman picked up her bill, and I jumped on as a sponsor of hers. That was based upon the sad case of Caitlin Rose Infinger, who was a young wife who could still be with us, except the judge kept releasing her estranged husband on one personal reconnaissance bond after another. And after the second bond was released, he chloroformed her cat and beat her up. And unfortunately, that judge re-released that person from the jail, and within 72 hours, Caitlin Rose Infinger was dead. So I have been a big proponent of bond reform and bail reform because we went way too far. And you've got, I'm as an American, I believe in a land of second chances, but I don't believe in sixth, seventh, or eighth chances. As somebody becomes more of a habitual criminal, becomes more violent, becomes more of a violent offender, that we let people out that do assault and assault with deadly weapon, or then they commit murder. And some of these people have been released on 2 capital murder bonds, and that's preposterous bad public policy. Should have never have occurred because they went out and did another killing. And so I'm on the Criminal Justice Committee, so where I'm going to continue, with bills in that area. And one big area that that criminal gangs moved into was paper plates on registration. For a while you saw everything on, every highway that everybody had a paper plate. Well, that turned out to be organized crime and fraud, where people started faking a car dealership. And unfortunately, the motor vehicle division sat on their butts for nearly 3 years and didn't fix the problem. So we had to get in with legislation and get a new board and new director, clean that one up. And I'll have a bill on catalytic mufflers, thefts, because that's effectively also turned into organized crime, and that needs to be cracked down on too as well.
Going back to local government, which you have chaired in the past, may possibly chair in the future, but your interest is certainly there. It's been observed that in recent years, state government, meaning both the legislature and the governor, have been trimming back powers to cities and counties. Now, there's no question, constitutionally speaking, that the legislature has that authority. But some people have said this is the Republicans getting back at Democrats who happen to hold mayoralties and county judgeships in major urban centers in the state. What do you say to that?
Well, first off, any system, business system, governmental system, etc., runs better with good top-down guidelines. And those top-down guidelines should set the limits of what local government can do, okay? Because really, county government, for example, is an extension of state government. Now, so I reject the charge outright because I've been trying to do local government efficiency for as long as I've known you, Chase, 25 years. Maybe we've known each other 35. I can't remember. It's a long time. And so you want government to be transparent, which a lot of local government has problems with now. You want to be efficient because you don't want the taxpayers to overpay, and you want them to follow the law. So I view this as trying to make sure that common sense prevails, like getting ballot paper out of the warehouse to the voters. That's common sense. We shouldn't even have to write a law on it, but we'll have to now. And more importantly, like lowering the rollback rates from letting government grow at 12, 13, 14% a year back to where it grows in single digits, that the public can sustain itself through taxation on are good top-down guidelines. But quite frankly, we've had some major knockdown, drag-out arguments with people that say, look, I'm a sanctuary city of this or that. It's no longer just immigration. It's a whole series of possibilities. And the reality is, no, you can't, okay? Because as this whole border conflict between the federal government and the state has proven that, that the layers of government have got to do their job. And if they don't, it costs the layers of taxpayers of other layers of government more money to make up for it. And so what I try to do local government, and we have a very robust and great debate on these issues, is let everybody talk about it, because at the end of the day, you want things to work. And that's why I was happy with the homestead tax reduction bills that people saw, because it worked. And people expect things to work eventually. And state government, things still do. Federal government, not so sure anymore. And I'm sorry if local government wants to grow at 12, 13, 14% their tax levies every year. I'm not going to let it happen, okay? Because I don't think that's balanced for happy on the taxpayers. The bottom line is we got citizens and we got taxpayers that pay all these government revenues, and somebody has to speak up for them, and I'm doing it. And I consider that just balancing the scales.
Well, once upon a time, it used to be conservative dogma that government closest to the people is best, that local control was better than state or federal control. Have you given up on that theory?
Well, I haven't given up on any theory that leads to operational excellence, but I have given up on whether or not an election administrator is better than having elected officials do the job. I've looked at the primary that happened in Harris County. That was a disaster. I looked at the fact we got, what happened here. So yeah, I've given up on an unelected bureaucrat being appointed on local control by decision by county government on a 3-2 vote to bring that person in. And clearly the performance metrics are horrible. So yeah, so we have to, part of this is you got to recognize the obvious, Chase, with anything. And you want government to be closest to the people, but at the same time, it has to function. And when it doesn't function, it's going to have to take top-down guidelines. And for example, yeah, we had to do some serious, changes in bond reform. I mean, as a senator and 9 Republican state reps, we actually wrote, an amicus brief that intervenes in Judge Rosenberg's case because we can't let people out of jail like popcorn that are violent offenders, because they're just recidivism. They're going to go out and do it again, and people are going to be killed, and property is going to be injured, and people are going to be hurt. And so we have to, if local judges want to make what I consider to be as an Aggie double dumbass mistakes and let people out like that, yes, we're going to change it because the safety of the public is what matters. The public's tax dollars matter, and if it takes top-down guidelines for do it right, then they're going to get tighter and tighter until it's done. The job's done right.
Okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes left. one of your personal specialties, going back maybe to when you were a high school math nerd, is deep dive.
Math jock, Chase.
Okay.
That's what we called ourselves back then.
Very good. The record stands corrected. But you have had a side specialty of very deep dive analyses into elections. So we all know in the midterm election of 2022, Republican Party won everything statewide, but suffered some setbacks on the local level. So have you been able to analyze, look behind the numbers, so to speak, to see which way state politics are trending in Texas?
Well, state politics are trending more Republican, primarily, and especially when you look at down in the valley, Republican percentage strength has grown really since 2016. Now, you said locally that we had some setbacks. Actually, what happened in Harris County, for the first time since 2014, 4 Republicans were elected countywide. The Republican Party's been shut out each year since then. Okay. Now, those are 3 misdemeanor courts and 1 felony courts. But the hopes were pinned on the county judge candidate, Alex Mueller, versus the incumbent, Lena Hidalgo. So even though Republicans broke through for the first time in 8 years, the Republicans especially were hopeful that Alex Mueller would win, but she lost by approximately 18,000 votes. But the fact that Harris County is back to being purple again is different than what it had been, a solidly blue environment in 2018, 16. So 22, you mentioned earlier, there's a crack in the door, and that's exactly what happened with the Republican Party here. And it was based upon crime and corruption. We haven't talked about the fact that the county judge was the only county judge in America with 3 indicted staff members. But those cases will play out this year. But those 2 issues really what drove Republican turnout, and it was a completely different turnout mix than it was in the presidential election when President Trump was at the head of the ticket. Just to give you a quick math, President Trump, I believe, lost Harris County by 212,000. I'm going from memory, but Governor Abbott and Governor Patrick actually only lost Harris County by about 103,000 votes. And actually, Governor Patrick was actually about 1,000 votes ahead of Governor Abbott. So that was a 100,000 vote change at the front end of the ballot, and the back end of the ballot floated very strongly Republican based upon crime and corruption. So that actually, I think that trend's going to continue because some of the constables won in 2020 on the same issue in district races. And that's going to be a major battleground until people decide that it behooves public policy for everybody in the community to lock up violent criminals and keep them off the street.
Well, my memory goeth back not all that far to when Harris County, and for that matter, Dallas and Fort Worth, Tarrant County, were reliable Republican counties. They may not have been huge landslides, but they carried for Republican candidates for governor and U.S. senator, and that doesn't happen anymore. So what has changed?
Well, effectively, I call it Texas has a string of blueberries surrounded in a sea of red. Okay. And what we're seeing now, because of the frothy nature of national politics, is that while there's swing vote, there's not as much swing vote as there used to be. And for example, there's probably close to, out of 1.1 million votes in Harris County, about 10% of it, slightly more than that, were swing voters. But that means that generally, because it's a Democratic county, that while some Republicans could add up to be more than 50%, the Republican base vote total is lower than the Democrat base total. And so the Republicans that won effectively got nearly all the swing vote to the win. And the 3 lady judges should be commended on that. But more importantly, I think it speaks to what we need more in politics, which is there were actually Democrat judges that had really horrible records that lost in the Democrat primary on the same issue. And we've got to go back to doing more of what we do in the Texas Senate is you can vote any way you want to, but sometimes let's analyze what's really happening. And when you look at what's happening on these trends on crime, that's really something that both party voters should be taking a serious look at and voting in what I think is in the better way of the community. So for the first time in 8 years, it happened because Republicans hadn't won anything in 8 years, and they actually won 4 judgeships. So I'm glad that we actually have a competitive county now, and that people of both parties can get elected, because we just don't need people that are refusing to ever, not deny somebody bail, because we've had people that have done horrible things that have gotten personal recognizance bonds or low dollar federal bond bails, sometimes 11, 12, 13 times in a row. And I'm glad to see that most of those judges aren't around anymore.
Well, Senator Paul Bettencourt, thank you so much for your time and being, as always, expansively candid and full of facts. And we thank you for your time today, and we'll let you get back to work.
Well, no problem. And we can continue the discussion on my radio show on the Three Amigos any Friday from 4 to 6 on 700 AM. So, Chase, you're always a welcome caller, along with everybody in the Hobby Center.
Okay, well, sign me up. But thank you for agreeing to be with us today on the Hobby Hour. And we thank our listeners and watchers for tuning in. This is Chase Untermeyer and Senator Paul